Welcome back to episode number 8 of ECW on FX, and this is the go-home show before our first pay-per-view of this new era, Living Dangerously 2007. Last week we had the disappointing show that rated below our minimum requirements. While it was actually the best TV ratings we ever got, the show wasn't good enough for, I think, 3 of our broadcasters, so we have to hope that this week is a better show, and I'm pretty confident with what we've put on, especially the main event, that it will be. We begin with a look back at the ending of last week's show. Despite that disappointment, there was a significant storyline moment as Xavier defeated Sonny Siaki in a steel cage match as a result of the pre-match stipulation that both men agreed on, and Sonny Siaki tapping out in the middle of the ring to that crossface. He has been fired from ECW. The commentators then introduced the show, talking about the ramifications of that and promoting tonight's main event, Steve Corino versus Rob Van Dam, just 72 hours before Rob Van Dam challenges for the ECW World Championship against Rhino at Living Dangerously. So the commentator's doing well opening up the show, and we go into what I hoped would be another good segment, and it has delivered. Paul Heyman improvising well, Homicide coming down to the ring with no music. He's looking down and depressed, having seen the ranks of the Hustle reduced to just 3 last week as a result of Siaki's firing. The group leader looks to be in an awful mood and takes a microphone saying that he blames one man for what happened: Paul Heyman. He calls out the chief of ECW, who he said would be out to sell this pay-per-view later anyway, but he wanted to talk to him and he wanted to know why Heyman hung the Hustle out to dry. When Homicide refused to leave the ring, Heyman did come out and had some harsh words, home truths for Homicide. He admitted that he gave the Hustle everything that they wanted early on, but it was Homicide's poor leadership that destroyed the Hustle. Homicide looked ready to throw a punch at Heyman and drop him in the middle of the ring, but the chief of ECW smartly retreated. Once out of the ring, Heyman recommended that Homicide stop trying to lead a revolution and get back to doing what he is paid to do. That could start at Living Dangerously when he faces the man who is about to make his entrance for the opening match up next. Teddy Hart's music hits and he comes down to the ring. He'll face Homicide at Living Dangerously, but first he goes one-on-one with Tony Mamaluke. It's a mayhem match with a dominant, decisive victory for Teddy Hart. No worker improvements, but we are still seeing very good performances from Teddy Hart, to say that he is being held back by the overbooking of the match and the fact that he is just a newcomer. So we're very happy with his start to the company. In just over 5 minutes he picks up the victory and is joined in the ring by TJ Wilson and Harry Smith, the other members of the New Hart Foundation. All 3 men make their pay-per-view debuts at Living Dangerously on Sunday. Teddy Hart, of course, will face Homicide, while TJ Wilson and Harry Smith will face fellow newcomers Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness. We continue that discussion with the commentators before leading to the back where William Regal is watching the New Hart Foundation in the ring. Regal is approached by the interviewer Jade, who asks him about the match this Sunday. Before William Regal gets a chance to say much about the men involved, he is confronted by Little Guido, who is flanked by the rest of the FBI, Chuck Palumbo and Trinity. Guido talks about these newcomers taking the spots of the established guys and suggests that Regal knows that his boys and the New Hart Foundation aren't ready for the full-blooded Italians. Regal looks to his side, where Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness step into the shot. Regal spoke to both men, taking their words into consideration before telling Guido that he saw exactly what he was doing, but Bryan and Nigel were more than happy to see them added to the match this Sunday, so the New Hart Foundation v Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness match will now be a 3-way dance tag team match or a triple threat tag team match. William Regal improvising well. It's another good segment. We've had a good start to this show. I'm confident, especially with how good that main event's going to be, that we will have a very good go-home show. Speaking of one of those competitors, Rob Van Dam's training camp is shown, footage from a couple of weeks ago. I meant to put this on an episode a few weeks back, but I forgot to do it, or we ran out of time. It was something like that. Avidi is shown doing various stretches and workouts, and it's designed to put over just how seriously and how important this match for him is this Sunday as he faces Rhino for the World Championship that he never lost. He's got Rhino this Sunday. The second match of the night sees Rhino's right-hand man Jerry Lynn in action, and he picks up a victory over Chad Collier in 7 minutes and 34 with a cradle pile driver. He'll face Chad Collier's partner Brent Albright this Sunday. This comes from the fact that Brent Albright lost to Rhino in less than 2 minutes on the 3rd or 4th, maybe 5th episode of ECW on FX. Jerry Lynn made light of that, and that led to Brent Albright challenging him. During the match, it's clear that Lynn is taking Chad Collier pretty lightly, and this almost leads to him being rolled up and losing the match. Nonetheless, he picks up the victory after being able to regroup and show his veteran edge. He puts in a decent performance. We still want to see him go up to the next level. I'm hoping to get him to the high 50s, if not 60s. Chad Collier Collier doing okay, and I think they'll have a decent match at the pay-per-view. They face off after the match. Brent Albright's feelings of frustration towards Geraldine only increased by how lightly he chose to take Chad Collier in the early goings. They are both ready for that match. Another match for the pay-per-view is Xavier and Low-Ki against the Havana Pitbulls for the World Tag Team titles. On the first episode, the first match of ECW on FX, Low-Ki and Xavier defeated the Havana Pitbulls, ending their 7-month undefeated run at 10 matches. Low-Ki gives an update on the condition of Xavier as we see footage of him being thrown from pillar to post by Sonny Siaki in the steel cage during that main event match, but Low-Ki guarantees that while Xavier isn't here tonight, he will be at Living Dangerously, and whether he's 100% or not, they're coming for the Havana Pitbulls, and they know that they can beat the World Tag Team Champions because they've done it before. This leads into the entrances for the main event. Steve Corino comes down and is joined by Paul Burchill. However, just as the bell is about to be rung, CM Punk comes down. He's looking to balance out the presence of Paul Burchill, who is his opponent for the pay-per-view. The tension ahead of their match at Living Dangerously spills over before the bell even rings, and the two men begin brawling on the outside. They're eventually pulled apart by a group of people coming from the back. We put over the intensity of the two men. They've not had that much of a personal rivalry, but clearly they're both fired up for the pay-per-view and are ejected from ringside. That means that hopefully we'll get a fair one-on-one main event between Steve Corino and Rob Van Dam. Of course, with so much going on, that was never likely, but we did get a good wrestling match with a decent reaction from the crowd, and I'm happy with the rating, a 71C+. Rob Van Dam putting in those main event performances like he always does, and it's really good to see that those 3 months off haven't really affected him too much. He's still doing really well. Of course, Steve Corino is always reliable in that spot of being just below what you'd want from a pay-per-view main event level guy, although that could be just as much put on my booking of him because he does lose 30 to 40% of his matches. Paul Burchill doing well at ringside despite not being there, so that's something I should have changed. But the booking of the match sees C.W. Anderson and Stevie Richards, of course the other members of the Extreme Horsemen, they want to try and have an effect given that Paul Burchill has now been barred from ringside, but Rob Van Dam quickly takes them out. It's just showing his quick, evasive style and of course his brutal leg-based offense. This actually plays into the main event when Rhino comes down during the distraction of the referee trying to get C.W. Anderson and Stevie Richards to the back. He enters the ring when both men are down and wants to hit a gore to Rob Van Dam to take him down and potentially cost him the match just 72 hours before the pay-per-view, but Rob Van Dam moves out of the way, avoids the gore, and instead Steve Corino is taken out. By now the ref is back in the ring and Rhino argues with him, allowing Rob Van Dam to throw him to the outside. Steve Corino is already out, but Rob Van Dam still goes to the top rope and hits a 5-star frog splash. The fact of the matter is that even if he hadn't have done that move, the gore from Rhino would have ended the match either way. Steve Corino doesn't move after the match. The idea of these first 8 weeks of ECW on FX have just been putting over Rhino as an unstoppable force. We've put over that he's undefeated. He beat Brent Albright, retaining the TV title in under 2 minutes, and that gore is just the most protected move in ECW at the minute. He regroups on the outside, furious that he missed his target and instead took out Steve Corino. He's not that bothered about Steve Corino, but of course with such a short time to that pay-per-view, he would have wanted to damage and weaken Rob Van Dam. He didn't manage to do that, but lead commentators still put over just how deadly that gore is. It is a move that nobody has kicked out of in ECW. Rob Van Dam may have had a smug smirk on his face as the show ended, and he was rightful to take pleasure in his victory. He'd overcome a lot. Paul Burchill, C.W. Anderson, Stevie Richards and Rhino all gunning for him, but it was clear that if he wanted a chance of winning at Living Dangerously, he would have to avoid the gore, because if Rhino takes Rob Van Dam down with that move, there is only one result, and that is Rhino retaining the title. So it's a 63, it is only just above the threshold that we need, but of course that main event we were always likely to reach a decent rating. I do think we need to get more consistency in the lower card, particularly those matches. I think we've got a 38 in the opener there, a 51 really isn't good enough either. We need more good segments and we need to make sure that we're not getting that close, because 2 ratings lower than that would have meant we would have got another warning, and there is actually a risk that if we keep having these hit and miss shows we could get kicked off FX and basically destroy the entire series. We'll see what we do ratings wise, because I think that is a really big main event, and hopefully the fact that we had one of our biggest stars in that match will mean that we can get a very good rating going into Living Dangerously 2007. And the show gets a 2.49 rating, 1.867 million viewers, so that is again an improvement, our best rated show yet. The growth is continuing, which of course is really great to see. That pay-per-view is the next show, and I really hope that while the TV show has been a little bit hit and miss, we can hit a home run with that pay-per-view, and I'm very confident that Living Dangerously 2007 could well be our best show yet, and that Rob Van Dam v Rhino main event could be our best match ever. Another thing I wanted to note was about CM Punk's performances since that incident with Tommy Dreamer. Dreamer beat him up in the back and it really did affect his morale. He's been annoyed since that date, and I've just thought I don't want to give just him a bonus for that because bribing him probably isn't the answer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody on the roster a $5,000 bonus. That's going to cost us $220,000, but we made much more than that in profit this month, so I'm not worried about that. And it's just a little boost. We've got the pay-per-view, we've got the new TV money, so why not give a bit back to the roster and hope that it can improve our shows by improving morale. We'll see how it affects Punk initially. So he is now happy, so hopefully we can get him back to those performances he was reaching. And obviously Shane doesn't get any of that money, and Raven is still annoyed despite that. But going into the pay-per-view, we now will have a much more happy roster, a probably more harmonious locker room, so that should curb those negative incidents, but also hopefully see our performances go to another level. Tommy Dreamer has been unhappy with his booking recently quite a lot, so I think that's the reason for his bitterness and his bullying of CM Punk in that incident. I've gone on a bit too much about the incident, but it was a really strange thing to happen. Nonetheless, that is the end of this episode, and Living Dangerously 2007 is just 2 days away.